The snow came down so thick it ate the world. It swallowed sound, swallowed color, swallowed the last clean edges of the ruined listening post as they closed in on her. Flurries spun in a furious spiral through the shattered roof, coating rusted rebar and broken consoles, turning everything into a jagged sculpture of white and steel. Somewhere out in that blind whiteness, men shouted to each other, confident and careless, certain they had her pinned. Sergeant Lena Voss lay motionless behind a buckled control console, cheek pressed to frozen concrete, rifle steady. Her breath slipped out in slow, measured streams that vanished almost as soon as they formed. Every exhale was a calculation. Too much vapor, and they'd spot the plume. Too little oxygen, and her vision would blur at the edges. They thought she was done. She heard it in the way they moved. Boots crunched closer over broken glass and ice. A laugh cut through the blizzard, too loud, too sure. "What's she going to do, huh?" One voice jeered in a guttural accent, close enough now that Lena could pick out individual words. One woman, snow up to her knees, nowhere to run. Should have stayed home and made soup. More laughter. A second voice joined in, younger, riding the wave of bravado. They were enjoying the idea of this, of dragging out the moment, of stretching it into something they could retell over cheap vodka later. Lena didn't answer. Instead, she eased her right sleeve back with a careful twitch of fingers, just enough to reveal the tiny emblem sewn into the back of her glove. A pale silver crescent, no larger than a grain of rice, stitched into the fabric. Someone looking straight at her would have missed it, but it wasn't meant for them. Her thumb pressed once against it. Not hard, just enough. Out in the wideout behind the advancing line of silhouettes, something dark and low slipped through the storm, moving against the wind with the easy assurance of a creature born to the cold. Not backup, not a miracle. Her second unit had arrived. 6 hours earlier, the temperature had dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius, and now it felt even colder as Lena flattened herself against the outside wall of the abandoned station. The structure crouched on the ridge line like a broken animal, 3 walls still standing. One collapsed entirely into a charred tangle of steel and rock. Once, it had been a border early warning node. Then the front had surged past it, deeper into the high country. No one had bothered to reclaim the ruin, which made it perfect. Either her temporary grave, Lena thought, or her kill box. She hadn't decided which yet. Wind squealed through gaps in concrete and twisted metal, driving shards of ice and powder into her exposed cheek like a swarm of needles. She blinked once, forcing her eyes to water and clear the grit without lifting a hand. Any movement against this flat, monochrome backdrop would draw the eye. Her heartbeat stayed slow, steady. She counted it as much as she counted the gusts. The ridge gave her height and a clear line of sight across the tree-choked valley below. The enemy had been chasing her for the better part of the day. Not a random separation, not a mistake. She'd peeled off on purpose during the firefight at the relay village, drawing their attention away, while the rest of her team evacuated the wounded. Command had argued with her over the comm, voices crackling through static, ordering her back toward them. Lena had cut the link mid-sentence. Some calls weren't requests. They weren't even discussions. They were just realities you stepped into. She'd led them up the valley, leaving signs just noticeable enough to tug them along. A boot print deeper than it needed to be. A low branch snapped at shoulder height. A smear on a rock that could have been blood or rust. It was a breadcrumb trail designed for 2 kinds of hunters: overconfident locals and the professionals who thought they were smarter than overconfident locals. By the time she reached the listening post, they were right where she wanted them. Inside, she'd check her rifle. An M2010 bolt action, modified stock and barrel sleeve, chambered for .300 Winchester Magnum. 12 rounds left. She'd fired 8 during the village contact. 8 shots. 8 bodies down in the snow. They didn't know that. From her point of view, it had just been flashes and chaos and men falling. Let them think her desperate. It made them stupid. Her fingers brushed the emblem on her glove again. The tiny crescent she'd stitched herself 3 winters ago at Aurora Ridge Winter Warfare School. It had been a joke at first, something to mark the end of a course where half the candidates washed out before week 3. It became something else when she realized what the instructors were really teaching. In weather that tried to kill you every minute, victory belonged to whoever could turn the environment from a hazard into a weapon. That's why she'd picked this ruin. 3 intact walls to break the wind. A collapsed section on the east side that offered a low exit if she needed to move fast. The roof had caved in toward the south corner, leaving jagged slabs that cast deep shadows, perfect for hiding motion. Snow lay shallow inside compared to the drifts outside, which meant she could move quietly while attackers had to plow through knee-high powder. She hadn't stumbled into this place. She dragged them here. And now, as voices rose over the howl of the gale, they believed they were the ones closing the noose. Lena listened, eyes half-lidded, and counted. 7 distinct voices. No 8. There, the one with the clipped consonants, barking orders instead of jokes. A commander, or at least someone who thought he was. More feet than voices, though. 10, maybe 12 men out there. Manageable. Her hand hovered over the radio clipped to her chest, then dropped away. Calling for extraction would earn her nothing but unanswered static. The nearest friendly unit was 40 kilometers south, pinned on the wrong side of the storm front. Helicopters were grounded, drones useless in this wind. She was alone until morning. Except she wasn't. Beyond the broken walls, somewhere in the maze of snow-laden spruce below, something that had been perfectly still for over an hour shifted its weight, listening. Spread wide. No bunching. The commander shouted from the storm, his words ragged but clear. No one wants a bullet, because you like your neighbor's perfume. The men laughed. Nervous edge under it, but laughter all the same. Lena edged her eye up to a crack in the concrete that used to be a conduit port and watched them ghost out of the white. They wore mismatched winter gear, layered in whatever they could scrounge. Civilian parkas over military webbing, scarves wrapped high, goggles crusted white. Their weapons were better matched. AK pattern rifles, a couple with aftermarket optics that would be nearly useless in this visibility. What worried her wasn't the rifles. It was the PCAM light machine gun being lugged toward the center of the pack. That, left alone, could strip what little cover she had left in a gravel. Noted, they advanced in a shallow arc that would close around the listening post from 3 sides. Standard small unit tactics. Keep her hemmed in, apply pressure, force her into a mistake. Lena had taught those drills. She knew exactly what counted as a mistake and what only looked like one. Thermals are garbage, someone grumbled to the commander's left. Everything's just white. The mountain hates you, that's all, another replied. Stop whining and use your eyes, the leader snapped. She's one shooter. Maybe wounded. Maybe not. Stuck in a ruin with no roof. This is charity, boys. He stepped closer, and his face swam into focus between curtains of blowing snow. Mid-40s, thick stubble shot through with gray, a scar pulling down the left side of his mouth. The kind of man who'd been fighting since before Lena had signed her first enlistment papers. You hear me in there? He called, switching languages clumsily, throwing in the broken English he thought special forces used with each other. You're finished. This outpost is a bad place to die, but there are worse. Come out. Make it fast. She didn't move, didn't blink. Silence felt heavy in her chest, but it was its own kind of weapon. Words leaked information, position, breathing, state of mind. Silence forced them to fill in the gaps with their own fear. One of the younger fighters stepped closer, snow squeaking under his boots. Maybe she's already dead, he shouted, emboldened by the lack of response. Maybe she froze. Or maybe she's hiding, crying, because it's cold and dark and she's all alone. You think command sent you here because you're strong? He laughed. They sent you because you're expendable. Lena's jaw remained slack, lips parted just enough to keep her breath smooth. Let them think she's cornered. Let them think she's on her last rounds. Let them think she's alone. Her left hand pressed flat to the cold floor. 3 slow taps, a pause, then one sharp rap. The vibration traveled through the skeletal mainframe racks around her, down through cracked concrete into the frozen earth. A language that didn't belong to humans at all. 2 months earlier, At Aurora Ridge Winter Warfare Facility, the wind had clawed at her face hard enough to feel like sandpaper. The digital thermometer at the gate had read -32 degrees Celsius, and that was before the gusts turned breath into shards of ice. Again, Captain Ajay Rana had called over the storm, his voice bored, as Lena dug herself out of the drift she'd just fallen into. She grunted, spat snow, and hauled herself upright with numb hands. Her navigation drill had gone sideways 30 minutes earlier, and she'd been paying for it ever since. "This is not about you being tough," Rana said as she trudged toward him. He stood perfectly still in the gale, as if the cold had decided he wasn't worth the effort. Beside him sat a black-and-white Belgian Malinois, muscles rigid, amber eyes watching Lena with unnerving intensity. "This is about you being useful." "I'm aware, sir," Lena replied between breaths. "I've worked with bomb dogs before. Patrol, detection. I understand handler relationships." The captain snorted. "You understand pets with jobs?" he said. "We're not training that here." His gloved hand rested lightly on the dog's shoulders. The animal didn't react to the touch, didn't lean in, didn't flinch away. He just kept staring at Lena, taking her in the way she took in a kill zone. "This is Kilo," Rana said. 3 years old, born on this mountain, trained for cold before he was fully grown. He doesn't need you to tell him when to sit or stay. He doesn't care if you scratch his ears. He's not your partner because he loves you. Rana's eyes narrowed. He's your partner if you can keep up with him. Lena frowned. How do you coordinate in combat if you're not handling him? For a sniper, you ask the right questions, Rana said, amused. He turned and began walking into the storm. Come on, both of you. Their training was divided into weeks, each one trying harder to break her so they could see what remained underneath. The first week taught her what Kilo could do. In clear air, his nose could pick out a human at 300 meters, easy. In a blizzard, that range dropped, but not the way human senses did. Cold sharpened scent. Snow trapped it. He could trace footprints long after the storm had filled them. Follow the faintest whiff of adrenaline or gunpowder. Distinguish friend from foe by their gait and the way their muscles tensed. He worked in absolute silence. No barking, no warning growls. The instructors corrected him harshly the first and only time a low rumble slipped from his throat during an exercise. The moment they know he's there, Rana told her, he loses half his advantage. The second week stripped away her voice. No spoken commands, no calling his name. Instead, she learned a language of gestures, pressure, posture. Kilo had been trained to read the angle of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, the way her center of gravity shifted. He'd been conditioned to respond to patterns in her movement as much as deliberate signals. More important than any of that, Rana said one night as they huddled around a tiny heater in a canvas tent that snapped and groaned in the wind, was trust. In a whiteout, he said, pouring coffee that steamed between them, you might not be able to see him. He might not be able to see you. You won't have time to wave your hands around or tap on walls. You'll both have to work the problem on your own and assume the other is doing the same. Sir, with respect, Lena replied, exhausted and blunt. How is a dog supposed to make tactical decisions? Rana looked at her for a long moment, then asked, how do you? She opened her mouth, then shut it. You're not calculating wind drift and angles every second you're under fire, he went on. Most of the time, you're running patterns you learned long before you stepped into the kill zone. You see a bush shake the wrong way, and your gut says threat, and you move. That's experience turned into instinct. Kilo has that too, just tuned to different inputs. He tapped his chest. You trust your training. Trust his. The third week pitted them against actual hunters from the region, men and women who'd grown up tracking game through these same valleys and ridges. Their task was simple. Find Lena and Kilo before dawn. Lena's task was simpler. Don't let that happen. The first run lasted 3 hours. She tried to orchestrate every step Kilo took, signaling constantly, treating him like a piece on a board that needed to be moved into what she thought were the best positions. Her focus narrowed to a tunnel around his small, dark shape in the snow. They were found in 90 minutes and surrounded 15 minutes after that. When the exercise halted, Rana didn't bother to hide his disgust. You are not his puppeteer, he said flatly. He already knows how to hunt humans. He doesn't need your help with that. He needs you to cover what he can't see and shoot the things he doesn't have teeth for. The second run, she did the hardest thing she knew how to do in combat. She let go. She kept track of him out of the corner of her eye, but stopped trying to micromanage every move. She focused on terrain, on angles, on long lines of sight, on where her rifle would matter. Kilo drifted in and out of the whispering curtain of snow, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes nowhere in sight. They stayed invisible for an entire night. By morning, the hunters had died, one by one, touched on the arm or leg by Kilo's teeth in prearranged mock kills, or pinned in Lena's scope, laser dots glowing on their vests. By the fourth week, they no longer felt like a soldier and her dog. They felt like two separate units, overlapping circles of capability that together covered more than either could alone. The final test was brutal in its simplicity. 30 instructors, all armed with simulation rounds, turned loose over 50 kilometers of high mountain. 48 hours. Objective: survive and eliminate half the force. They cleared 19 in the first 12 hours. Lena never saw some of the kills Kilo made. She only saw the aftermath: boot prints broken by sudden, wild scuffs, marks in the snow where weight had slammed down hard, the bright red of paint rounds sprayed across chest plates. By the end, they'd taken out 31. They were exhausted, half-frozen, bruised. Kilo's paws were cracked despite the protective balm and wraps. But when Rana pinned the Aurora Ridge Arctic qualification patch to Lena's jacket, his voice was quiet. Most teams never get past functional, he said. You too, you're something else. Don't waste it. She hadn't. 7 deployments later, no mission failures, and now, up on this shattered ridge in a country that wasn't technically at war, but bled like it was, she was about to cash in everything Aurora Ridge had taught them. Enough. The commander barked outside, voice slicing through her memory. We stopped playing. Lena heard the change in the sound of movement, boots shuffling, packs rustling, people shifting positions. A new cadence, more purposeful. No more joking. Burn her out, he ordered. She doesn't want to come. We drag her. 2 figures stepped forward, darker silhouettes against the blur of white. In their hands, they held bottles, dark glass already half-frosted, cloth wicks protruding from the mouths like tongues. Molotovs. Crude, but effective in a ruin lined with ancient insulation and splintered beams. Lena's fingers curled against the floor. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slow ones. Out in the valley, buried deep inside a collapsed drainage culvert, Kilo's ears twitched. He had been waiting for 90 minutes in a pocket he'd dug into the snow, body curled but ready, heart rate low to conserve heat. The snow above him wasn't just cover. It was a blanket, trapping a bubble of warmth close to his body and masking his thermal signature from any half-functioning camera. The vibrations from Lena's taps traveled through frozen ground like faint music. To human bones, it would be nothing. To Kilo, with his paw pads resting directly on packed earth, it was as clear as a voice. Move. Close. Hold. He slid forward on his belly, muzzle pushing through the white into the open. The world above him was a blurred tunnel of gray and shadows. He sniffed once. The wind carried the sharp tang of fuel and sweat and excitement down to him. He didn't go straight up the hill. He went sideways, looping around to approach from behind, using the folds of terrain and the storm itself as allies. Snow muffled every step. Up at the ruin, one of the bottle bearers touched his lighter to a rag. Flame flared an angry orange, momentarily painting his glove and mask with color. Ready, he shouted. Lena shifted left toward the collapsed eastern wall, away from where they would expect her to retreat. Fire floods a space upward. Smoke draws eyes toward the densest black. She wanted their focus there. Now, the commander snapped. The first bottle arced through the gap in the roof, trailing fire like a comet tail. It smashed against an interior beam and exploded into liquid flame. Heat leapt up, ravenous, licking at old cables and insulation. Smoke billowed, thick and choking. There, someone yelled as they caught the flicker of her movement through the collapse. Gunfire erupted, a storm within storm. Rounds hammered shattered consoles and punched through aging walls in showers of dust and ice. Lena rolled behind tangles of rebar, counting the rhythm of their bursts, memorizing who fired in controlled shots and who emptied magazines in wild panic. Outside, at the very edge of the formation, the rearmost guard shifted his weight, glancing back into the storm. He never saw Kilo. The dog appeared out of the snow like a piece of the mountain breaking free. One moment the guard was alone. The next, 80 pounds of muscle slammed into him from behind. They hit the ground hard. The man's rifle knocked sideways. Kilo's jaws closed on the soft flesh just above the scarf, teeth finding arteries through layers of fabric and skin. The kill took 3 seconds and produced no more sound than a strangled grunt cut off mid-breath. The second rear guard half-turned, instincts prickling. He saw movement, a dark blur at the edge of his vision, and jerked his rifle up. Kilo had already launched again, adjusting mid-air, teeth snapping down on the man's weapon hand first. Bones cracked. The rifle dropped. The man fell next, clutching his ruined arm, mouth wide in a silent scream that never got fully formed before Kilo's teeth found his throat. 10 seconds after Lena's second signal, both rear guards were down. No one up front noticed. Their attention was locked on the ruin, on the fire, on the enemy they could imagine. Smoke thickened inside, filling Lena's lungs with heat and grit, making her eyes water. The fire turned the ruin into a furnace, eating through old wood and plastic. The storm injected fresh oxygen through gaps in the walls, giving the flames teeth. Time to move. She kept her body low, crawling toward the collapsed eastern wall, using the flow of smoke as cover. It moved in strange patterns, pools, funnels, sudden clearings as the wind shifted. She timed her movements to those pockets, moving only when she knew the outside eyes would be blind. Out beyond the ruin, the machine gunner dropped to a knee and began setting up his PKM on a broken section of wall that gave him a clean lane into the interior. He ignored the little shiver of unease that came with not knowing why the rear felt quieter. As he fed the belt, Kilo ghosted through the drift 50 feet behind him. He approached at an oblique angle, low to the ground, body elongated, paws falling where the wind had already smoothed the snow. To anyone glancing back, the storm would show them nothing but white on white. When he struck, he went for the arm braced on the gun's grip. His jaws crushed down on muscle and tendon, shaking once hard until the bone gave way. The gunner shouted, but the sound cut off when Kilo shifted higher and clamped down over the man's mouth and nose, suffocating the sound and the man at the same time. The machine gun tipped sideways into the drift, barrel pointing harmlessly into the snow. 7 seconds. The commander's head snapped around at the muted thud. For the first time since he'd crested the ridge, real fear edged his voice. "Rear contact," he yelled, spinning to see nothing but the snow and his fallen gunner. The darkness that had been there was gone, erased by the wind. The formation contracted. Men pulled closer together, rifles covering all directions now, breath heaving visibly in explosive bursts that instantly crystallized. Inside, the noise of gunfire died down, replaced by shorter, sharper bursts. Their confidence had cracked. Good. Lena slid into position at the narrow break in the western wall she'd picked out hours earlier. From this side, it was a jagged slit barely wider than her scope. From the outside, it was just another dark line in a shattered ruin. She eased the rifle up, resting the bipod legs on uneven concrete, and squinted through her optic. The world snapped into focus, grainy and gray, but usable. There he was, the commander, shoulders hunched, scanning the storm. 2 men flanked him. The group had pulled in tight, instinctively trying to form a defensive ring. 13 men had come up the slope. 2 were down in the back. 1 machine gunner lay twisted in a patch of scraped snow, and the firebomb carriers had dropped back to cover. 9 still standing. She flicked the safety off, then stopped. Not yet. She tracked the commander's head, letting the crosshairs wander with the rhythm of his scan, waiting for the next step in the pattern. Outside the optic, she could sense Kilo's movement. little more than a ghost at the edge of hearing. They'd done this dance enough times that she didn't need eyes on him to know where he'd go next. He circled out to the right, pushing lower, using a collapsed guardrail as partial cover, angling toward the weakest flank. There, one man, just a bit offset, his attention too weighted toward the ruin, leaving a gap between him and his neighbor. Kilo flowed through that gap like dark water. He hit the exposed fighter from the side, driving him down into the snow with a force that tore the gun from his hands. The man managed half a shout. Only half. Then there was blood on the snow and flailing, and then there wasn't. The others whipped around, firing wildly. Bullets chewed up snow and rock, but Kilo was already gone, slipping away under cover of the storm. Regroup. Tight, the commander yelled, dragging them into a tighter cluster. Lena's finger tightened. The suppressed crack of her rifle vanished into the wind. The man on the commander's left snapped backward, a neat hole drilled through the gap between helmet and collar. For a heartbeat, the whole formation froze. Then everything went sideways. Panic rolled through them in a visible wave. They fired at shadows, at the ruin, at the tree line, at the space where the machine gunner had died. No one seemed sure where the real threat was anymore. The commander shouted himself hoarse, trying to pull control back. Watch your fire. Hold line. She's just one. The word died when Kilo materialized again behind one of his men, close enough that the man could have reached out and touched him if he'd realized he needed to. Kilo's teeth flashed, too fast to track. The soldier spun, guns roaring. He emptied a full magazine into the storm. None of the rounds touched Kilo. One of them did graze Kilo's flank, tearing a strip of fabric from his harness and scratching skin beneath. The dog barely flinched. 3 of those misdirected bullets tore into one of his own comrades. The formation dissolved. Lena watched through her scope as order splintered into a panicked cluster of men backing into each other, shouting, firing at anything that moved. The commander tried to pull them toward the trees. Smart. If they disappeared into the forest with this much fear in them, they'd be harder to pin down and easier to lose. Can't have that. Her gloved fingers rapped quick code against the floor beside her. Circle. Harass. Don't commit. Kilo shifted immediately. He stopped going for killing hits every time. Instead, he flashed at the edge of their vision, a dark smudge here, a flicker there, always just out of reach. Whenever someone started running, he let them see him, just for a heartbeat, before darting away again. They chased him with bullets and curses and stumbled over their own dead. Their ring opened. Lena took the next shot. The commander pitched forward as if someone had jerked his strings. Snow puffed up around his face as his body hit the ground. The men nearest him stared, then screamed. Whatever remained of their discipline shattered. Fall back, one yelled, voice cracking. Into the trees. Go. They ran. Lena tracked them through her scope as they tore downhill, stumbling, sliding, leaving a jagged path of broken snow and dropped gear. She could have taken more of them. 3 easily. Maybe 4. Each shot would have been clean. She didn't fire. Fear traveled farther than bullets. Let them carry it. Kilo chose his own target. The slowest man, heavier pack, shorter stride, lagged behind, lungs burning. He made it almost to the first trees before a black shape hit him from the side and drove him hard into the snow. His scream cut the air like a wire, jagged and high, then broke off as Kilo's teeth found purchase. Then there were 3, and they didn't stop running until the ridge vanished behind them. They didn't stop because they thought they were safe. They stopped because their legs refused to go any farther. 100 meters into the forest, they collapsed against tree trunks, bent over their knees, dragging lungfuls of freezing air that burned their throats. One of them, barely more than a kid, cheeks still soft under his frost-streaked beard, fumbled at his magazine with shaking fingers. "What was that?" he gasped. "What was that?" Sergeant Oleg Markov, the oldest of the 3, stared back toward the ridge. Through the trees, he could just see the faint pillow of dark smoke rising where the listening post sat. "It wasn't just her," he said finally. "It was a devil," the kid said. "You saw it. You saw how it moved." "A dog," the third man muttered, voice low, eyes wide. "It was a dog. I saw its teeth when it took Yuri. It Military working dogs don't do that, the kid snapped. They bark, they chase. They don't hunt like that. Markov shook his head. I've heard stories, he said quietly. Afghanistan. The mountains east of here. Americans who train their dogs to hit like knives in the dark. We thought it was just talk. The kid stared at him. Commander never said anything, he whispered. He said one sniper. The commander is dead, Markov replied flatly. Because he was wrong. Silence settled between them, thick as the falling snow. We have to report, the third man said at last, pulling his radio from his vest with numb fingers. And say what? The kid snapped. That a woman and a dog tore our squad apart, and we ran. They'll call us cowards. They'll send us back up there with more men and no idea what we're facing. Markov met his eyes. There was no judgment in his expression, just exhaustion. We ran, he said. That's why we're alive. Call it whatever you want. He keyed the mic, voice steady even though his hand shook. Ridge Unit, this is Echo 3, he said, giving their call sign. Engagement with enemy special operations element at abandoned listening post. Heavy casualties. Operator employing sniper tactics, supported by Combat K9. Dog is trained for direct assault. Extremely effective in low visibility conditions. We are falling back to Rally Point Beta. Static hissed. Then a reply crackled through. Copy. Echo 3. Hold position at Beta. Reinforcements at first light. Verify. Combat Dog. Markov looked toward the shadowed ridge one last time. Affirmative, he said quietly. You don't want to meet it. He killed the transmission. Back on the ridge. Lena listened to every word on a receiver clipped under her jacket, the language familiar enough for her to understand tone, if not every phrase. She heard the tremor hiding beneath Markov's professionalism. Good. Stories like that reached farther than any bullet. She rose slowly, stretching sore muscles with a wince. The fire inside the listening post had begun to die. Fuel exhausted, heat bleeding away into the hungry cold. 7 bodies lay in immediate view. She knew there were more among the drifts. A dark shape emerged from the white, fluid and lethal even at a trot. Kilo came to a stop a few feet from her, chest rising and falling in steady bursts. Blood stained the fur around his muzzle and neck, already freezing into dark spikes. His eyes were as calm as they had been back at Aurora Ridge, watching her stumble out of a drift. Lena knelt, one knee sinking into the snow, and placed a hand lightly on his head. No cooing, no baby talk, no frantic praise. Just contact, unit to unit. Still here, still here. She checked the tear in his harness, fingers probing for warm blood under the strap. The bullet had grazed skin but done no serious harm. A few shallow cuts where claws had met hidden metal, nothing more. Nice work, she murmured. Kilo's tail flicked once against the snow. She took a bearing from the pale smear of sun somewhere above the clouds. Friendly lines lay 40 kilometers south. If they moved fast and didn't break pace, they could make it in 12 hours. Plenty of time before Echo 3's reinforcements got brave enough to come looking. Home, she said quietly. They turned their backs on the ruined station together and walked into the storm. The recon team came 3 hours before dawn. For figures this time, moving with tighter spacing and smoother discipline than the earlier militia. These weren't volunteers dragged out of local villages. These were professionals, boots planted carefully, nothing wasted, weapons held ready, but not tense. Lena lay prone on the lip of a narrow ravine, scope trained on the far bank. The storm had eased, visibility stretching to maybe 50 meters in thin gray sheets. Her breath formed soft clouds that drifted sideways. The point man scanned the ravine with quick, practiced sweeps. He checked rock overhangs, drift edges, the tops of the firs. His eyes never flicked to the thing that mattered. There was no reason to. Kilo was buried in the lower branches of a snow-loaded pine like a black knot, muscles coiled, paws gripping bark. The first operator slid down into the ravine, then the second. The space compressed them, forcing them closer together than their doctrine said was smart. The third started down. Lena's finger rested lightly on her trigger. Her crosshairs tracked center mass on the second man's back. Not yet. She lifted the heel of her boot just enough for Kilo to see the movement. Execute. He exploded out of the pine like a slingshot fired downward, hitting the third operator square in the shoulders. They crashed into the snow at the bottom of the ravine in a tangle of limbs and rifle and snarled fabric. The other three spun instantly toward the threat, their training kicking in: identify, fix, eliminate. They focus on what they can see. Lena fired twice, the recoil sharp and familiar against her shoulder. Two of the men jerked as rounds punched through armor at a range close enough to make it largely decorative. They toppled sideways, weapons jerking harmlessly into the snow. The fourth, now alone, snapped panic shots toward where Kilo and his teammate wrestled, rounds chewing up the drift, too wild to hit anything but air. Lena sent a third round his way. It took him in the shoulder, spinning him down, rifle flying. In less than 10 seconds, 3 were dead or dying. Kilo pinned the surviving man, teeth inches from his throat, breath hot and sharp in the frigid air. The operator froze, eyes locked on the dog. "Don't!" Lena called down his language, voice low but carrying. "He moves when I tell him to, and I am not feeling generous." The man stilled. She slid down the bank, rifle still on her shoulder, covering him. Kilo didn't take his eyes off the operator's face. "Who sent you?" Lena asked. He pressed his lips together. Blood seeped through his jacket at the shoulder where her round had punched through. In the distance, faint but growing, she heard the chop of rotors. Helicopters. The storm had lifted just enough for them to fly. "No time to play long games." "You were sent to count bodies," she said when he stayed silent. "Confirm what Echo 3 reported. See if the ghost in the snow is real." His eyes widened just a fraction. "So Command knows about the dog," she continued. "What do they think? That their boys panicked?" "Lie." After a beat, he rasped, "Some think they were exaggerating." "Not anymore," Lena said. She reached in her pocket and tossed a field dressing onto his chest. He stared at it like it was a snake. "You'll live long enough for your ride," she said. "When they ask what happened, tell them you ran into a forward recon element and got your ass kicked. Leave me and Kilo out of it." She nodded toward the dog. "Why would I lie for you?" he asked roughly. "You wouldn't," she said. "You'd lie for yourself. Do you really want to tell them a woman and a dog dismantled your team in under 10 seconds? His jaw clenched. He said nothing. He didn't have to. She could already hear the story he'd eventually settle on, a version that spared his pride and still warned his commanders that something out here didn't fit their doctrine. Lena jerked her chin. Kilo eased off, still close enough that a twitch from her would put his teeth back where they'd been. "Remember," she said, "if you sin more, they find us only if we want them to." She climbed back up the ravine, Kilo following at her heel. They crested the ridge just as 2 distant specks resolved into helicopters skimming low over the valley. She and Kilo turned away from them and walked toward the distant smudge of friendly banners. They reached the forward base at dusk. Spotlights tracked them in from 300 meters out. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, ordering them to stop, identify. Lena answered with the day's code word, voice hoarse but steady. The gate opened. A young lieutenant practically jogged out to meet them, relief written all over his face. "Sergeant Voss," he blurted. "We thought. Command been trying to reach you for 18 hours. Comms failed when the outpost got hit," Lena said easily. Storm didn't help. His gaze flicked nervously to Kilo. The dog walked at Lena's side with the same calm, predatory grace he had in the storm. Blood had been washed off his fur, but something about him still made people take half a step to the side. "You were out there alone?" the lieutenant asked. Lena looked down at Kilo. The dog met her eyes, then glanced away toward the rest of the base with mild disinterest. "No," she said. "I wasn't." Debrief began within an hour. Medical first, vitals, frostbite checks, bruises cataloged. Then equipment. Counts of rounds fired, gear lost, structural damage to her rifle noted and scheduled for maintenance. Then intelligence. A major with deep lines around his eyes asked the questions while stenographer typed. How many hostiles had she engaged? 12 confirmed. Possibly more wounded. What were their weapons? Standard insurgent mix, 1 machine gun. Did she receive any support? Negative. He glanced at Kilo's file on his tablet. "And the dog?" he asked. "Anything unusual?" "Standard K9 protocol," Lena said smoothly. "Search, track, guard. Nothing outside training." Her record might have been thick with commendations, but she still knew when to keep the details to herself. The Aurora Ridge program was classified. Its methods weren't the base's business. They get what they needed to know. Kilo was examined separately by the veterinarian. Aside from superficial scrapes and that grazed flank, he was fine. The vet shook his head when he rejoined Lena later. "I've treated plenty of working dogs," he said. "None of them walk in after 18 hours in this cold with paws that look that good." He scratched Kilo lightly between the shoulders, more out of habit than belief that the dog cared. Whatever they taught him up there at Ridge, it stuck. By evening, Lena had clean clothes, a cot, and a tin mug of something that was technically stew if you were generous. Kilo lay beside the cot, head on his paws, awake but still. His presence was a weight against her nerves that kept everything tied together. Captain Elise Park ducked into the tent, shoulders shedding snow. "Voss," she greeted, dropping into the folding chair opposite the cot. "Hell of a mess you left up there." "I cleaned most of it up," Lena said. "They'll find pieces for weeks." Park smirked. "Intel loves you right now," she said. "Enemy radio traffic is a circus. Half their people are saying there's a new American special unit operating up there. The other half are swearing they were attacked by a demon dog." Lena took a sip of stew to hide her smile. "Battlefield confusion," she said mildly. Park leaned back, studying her. "Most of command is happy to call it that. But I've read your training file. Aurora Ridge. K9 integration. You and Kilo graded out first in your class." She nodded toward the dog. "I'm not stupid enough to think he's just sniffing luggage for you." Lena set the mug down. "They underestimated us," she said simply. "They saw a woman in a ruin and assumed weak. They saw one shooter and assumed alone. They were wrong both times." Park's gaze flicked between her and Kilo. "Explain it to me," she said. "Not the actions. The principle." Lena searched for words. Not for Park's sake, for her own. "Most working dogs are treated like tools," she said slowly. "Useful, brave, but still tools. The handler is the operator. The dog is the asset. Aurora Ridge, they didn't train us that way." She drew in a breath. "They trained us as two units with different capabilities but equal roles." She glanced down at Kilo. "In that storm, there were chunks of time I couldn't see him," she said. "Couldn't signal, couldn't guide. I did my job, terrain, angles, long shots. He did his close threats, disruption." She shrugged. "We trusted each other to do it without constant checking in. That's not handler and asset. That's partners." Park was quiet for a long moment. "That's why you volunteered to peel off," she said. "You wanted to draw them away. Knew you and Kilo could handle being alone together." "That's why I volunteered," Lena agreed. "The team needed to move the wounded out. We needed someone to slow pursuit. We were suited for that. You understand," Park said, voice softening, "that now they're scared of you. Not just you. You and him together. That has value. It also paints a target on your back. Next time, it won't be panicked militia. They'll send people who know what they're doing. And if they ever catch you..." Her eyes flicked to Kilo. "He dies first," she said. "No negotiations. They'll treat him like a weapon." Lena's hand dropped automatically to rest on Kilo's side. "They won't catch us," she said. Park's mouth twitched. "Get some sleep," she said, rising. "You're in the briefing room tomorrow at 10:00. Command wants your thoughts on expanding Ridge-style programs." She paused at the tent flap. "Whether you realize it or not, Voss, you just changed some minds." When the flap fell, the tent grew quieter, the sounds from outside turning into a muted wash. Lena lay back on the cot. Kilo shifted closer and rested his head against the metal frame, a small pressure that said more than any spoken reassurance. She stared up at the tent's ceiling, mind already moving ahead to the next winter front, the next mountain, the next enemy who thought snow and darkness leveled the field. They were wrong. Snow and darkness favored those who knew how to live in them. 3 weeks later, the briefing room hummed with voices and the rustle of uniforms and paper. Maps of the ridge and its surrounds glowed on a large screen at the front. Satellite images showed the ruined listening post, the lines of approach traced in neat colors. Graphics annotated enemy movement, approximate casualty locations, weapon placements. Lena sat near the back, Kilo stretched under the chair, invisible except for the tip of his tail. A colonel with a polished skull and tired eyes tapped a pointer against the screen. 15 enemy fighters, he said. 1 friendly sniper, 1 K9. 8 confirmed dead on sight. Multiple wounded. No friendly casualties. He let that hang for a moment. Good ratios, someone muttered. Impossible ratios, someone else countered. Unless there was off-book support. The colonel shrugged. Storm grounded air, he said. No drones. No artillery. No second unit. Just Sergeant Voss and her dog. A murmur swept the room. An intelligence analyst near the front raised a hand. Survivor reports from the enemy side reinforce that, she said. They're describing a ghost in the snow and an animal working in tandem. They couldn't track either one. She hesitated. Some of their officers think their men cracked under pressure. Others are taking it very seriously. The colonel turned toward the back. Sergeant Voss, he said. You were there. What was the decisive factor? Heads turned. Lena felt dozens of eyes settle on her. Kilo rose as she pushed to her feet, assuming the movement meant change. He stood aligned with her, as he always did. Partnership, Lena said. The word echoed briefly in the sudden quiet. She stepped into the aisle, walking forward as she spoke. You're all looking at this like a math problem, she said. How did 1 shooter and 1 dog beat 15? Wrong question. Click. Her boots on the floor sounded loud. You want to know why I survived, she said. I'm telling you I wasn't trying to survive. I was executing, same as he was. She nodded down at Kilo. The enemy thought they had an isolated target in a bad position, she continued. They believed numbers and firepower would carry the day. They didn't account for the fact that they were engaging 2 units, not 1. Units that don't need constant coordination to work in sync. She gestured at the satellite image of the listening post. I turned the ruin and the storm in my rifle's ally, she said. Kilo turned them into his. While they focused on burning me out, he was dismantling their perimeter. While they reacted to him, I was taking their leadership apart. She let her gaze travel across the room. Most K9 doctrine treats dogs as extensions of handlers, she said. Useful, but secondary. Attachments. Aurora Ridge doesn't do that. They build dogs with tactical judgment, and then they train humans to get out of their way. A general at the front leaned forward. You're suggesting we recognize K9 units as equal operators? He asked. I'm suggesting that's what they already are, Lena said. You can either admit it and start training to take advantage of it, or keep pretending they're just bomb sniffers with teeth and waste their potential. She spread her hands, fingertips brushing the edge of the table in front of the generals. In that blizzard, no one talked us through what to do, she said. No one dropped a precision-guided solution from the sky. There was just a woman with a rifle and a dog with a mouth full of old scars and new training. We weren't force multipliers for each other. We were the force. Silence. Then, slowly the question shifted. They stopped being about the exact number of rounds fired and the angle of the drift the machine gunner had used. They started being about how Kilo had been trained to move, how signals were passed, how much autonomy could be safely given to an animal in combat. Lena answered what she could without touching the parts stamped red in her memory. Later, crossing the base with Kilo trotting beside her, Captain Park fell in step. You know, you just asked them to rewrite doctrine, Park said. Somebody had to, Lena replied. We've been underusing dogs for decades. Careful, Park said. You argue too well. They'll stick you at Ridge training new teams instead of letting you run around in the mountains. Lena glanced down at Kilo. Could be worse, she said. More teams like us means fewer bodies on both sides of the muzzle. At her quarters, Park paused. The enemy survivors are talking, she said. Not just in reports, in rumors. Some are calling you the snow ghost. Others say you fight beside a shadow that can't be killed. Let them, Lena said, opening the door. Fear's a weapon too. Inside, the room was simple. Cot, metal locker, small desk. A dog bed rested next to the cot. Not regulation, but tolerated. Kilo padded over to it, turned twice, and lay down with a content exhale. Lena unstrapped her rifle and set on the desk. The ritual of cleaning, it settled different parts of her mind that adrenaline never reached. Oil, cloth, metal, all in familiar patterns. You know what they'll do now, she said aloud, partly to herself, partly to Kilo. They'll write papers, issue guidelines, try to create what we have in bullet points and PowerPoint slides. Kilo's ears flicked, the only sign he was listening. They'll miss the important part, she said quietly. The trust. The hours in snow and dark where no one was watching but us. The times you made the right call, when I didn't even know there was a decision to make. She set the rifle aside and slid down onto the floor next to Kilo's bed. He shifted immediately, resting his head in her lap, warm weight grounding her more effectively than any briefing ever could. Partnership isn't a sign, she said. It's built. Her fingers sank into his fur, feeling the old scars under the thick coat. Each one of those lines marked a moment where he'd chosen to move forward instead of away, where she'd trusted him to. Outside, the wind began to rise again, catching on the edges of the prefab walls and whistling. Somewhere beyond the base, new clouds were forming over the peaks, heavy with snow. More storms were coming. More nights where the world shrank to white, and the only thing that mattered was which way you stepped. Lena closed her eyes. Beside her, Kilo's breathing was slow and even. A soldier's rest, not a pet's. Ready to snap awake the instant something changed. They didn't need saving. They'd never needed saving. They had each other. And for people who understood that war wasn't won by the strongest or the loudest, but by those who moved in absolute trust, that was enough.